Roy is going to start right away now. Roy is the executive director of the American Humanist Association. And I'm going to mention Maggie as well because they're a couple. And they're known as the dynamic duo. Because Maggie's the development director and was also in my class at the Humanist Institute, which was a delight. Another thing that Roy does is he serves on the board of the Humanist Institute. So that's all I'm going to say about you, Roy, because I think most of you know him already, and you're going to tell us a lot about what you do. And what I really appreciate so much about the American Humanist Association is how, under your leadership, you've really brought together all the different humanist groups, religious and secular, under that big humanist tent. And you really have made us more of a family.
Thank you, Anne. So I started in this humanist movement over a decade ago. And when I think about humanism, I want it to mean something everybody can understand. I want humanists to stand for something that will make a difference in people's lives. And I want humanism to continue to grow so it can have an increasing impact. So I wrote Creating Change Through Humanism with the idea of presenting humanism in a way that would spur some debate, spur some discussion, and help us keep evolving this ever-evolving philosophy, making it better and better. Now, the foreword is written by Dr. Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein, who is a prolific author and professor of philosophy at Harvard University. She writes, "Until quite recently, I was unaware of the existence of the secular humanist community, organized around the values of rationality, free inquiry, and the right each of us has to flourish in this life, the only life any of us will ever get. But sadly, this is problematic, isn't it? Somebody who's swimming in the circles that Dr. Goldstein is in has only just heard about humanism? We need to do something a little differently. We have to find ways to make our convictions clearer and more inviting. Several years ago, I presented in New York, and I talked about how same-sex marriage was making progress, and how soon did everybody think we might have it legal in every state of the union? You know, I said, in the next 10 years, and a few people raised their hand. And I said, well, maybe in the next 20 years, and some more folks raised their hand. But to get most folks to raise their hand, I said, 50 years from now, we'll get there. But here we are, and that has been accomplished, right? Dr. Goldstein gives us some of the tools to proceed and overcome some of the challenges we face. She says, if you believe in the integrity of your conclusions, you must show them to the world, making a case for them not only by the arguments that you hash out in the privacy of your own mind, but in the life that you publicly lead. So, what does it mean to be a humanist today? And I want to get some sense of the room here. So feel free to shout out, and I'll repeat if needed. What are some of the essential elements of humanism? What do you think? Compassion, absolutely. Anything else?
Science.
Science, okay. Others?
Enlightened skepticism.
Enlightened skepticism. All right, very good.
Free inquiry.
Free inquiry, okay.
Brother's keeper.
What's that?
Be your brother's keeper.
Being your brother's keeper. Okay.
Equality.
Equality, absolutely. Okay, wow, that's very good. Humanism isn't necessarily a religion in the traditional sense, as there's no kind of unchanging rules or set of beliefs one must follow, or higher power one must give over to, or attend services or pray before bedtime. It's not a philosophy really in the common sense, because it informs beyond the boundaries of the pursuit of knowledge into daily living. It's not a political dogma. It doesn't dictate a specific platform of beliefs and unchanging positions. Some call it a worldview or a life stance because it's intended to address all the realms traditionally associated with philosophy, religion, and simply living a good life. Humanism is the not-so-radical idea that you can be good without a belief in a God. It's the discovery that you not only don't need outdated texts or God experts to make good choices, but that those are often not the best resources for decision-making. Humanists, we affirm our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. Now, we ground that pursuit not in otherworldly ideas, but in the best of modern knowledge determined from trial and error and the scientific process. That makes humanism a foundation for strong convictions. Now, this first pillar of humanism for me is this unflagging dedication to the scientific method, as someone had pointed out, as a source for our knowledge. It's relied upon because experience has proven it reliable. It's not just something done, by the way, by PhDs and lab coats in some ivory tower institutions. Science is what we do every day. When a young child in a high chair picks up her food and throws it on the ground to see what happens, that's science. Believing knowledge of the world is derived through observation, experimentation, rational analysis, discards supernatural sources, unexamined dogma, and overly simplistic or absolute concepts of good and evil. We don't just simply disbelieve religious explanations. Rather, we find that some of them don't stand up to scientific scrutiny. Another pillar of humanism is empathy, which links what distinguishes humanism as a positive philosophy. Empathy is the capacity to recognize and share the feelings experienced by others. In 1933, Albert Einstein wrote, "There's one thing we do know. We are here for the sake of others, above all, upon whose smile and well-being our own happiness depends." By walking in another person's shoes, stepping outside our own preconceptions and personal limitations, we see others' viewpoints. It gives us insights into perspectives other than our own, and we learn what it feels like to experience realities we haven't even faced. It's almost as if we've learned from trial and error without having to experience the trial, and that's quite an advantage. We'd be well to consider that personally and as a society in the kind of global world that we're in. It's through cultivation of empathy that we develop a deep-seated compassion for humankind and the world at large. Empathy and compassion helped us as a species. It was survival for those who would look out for each other, and we also should remember that as we face the challenges that we face today. Now, such a commitment to empathy and compassion, and even science, might only have a modest impact on our positions if it weren't for an accompanying commitment to an egalitarian-based sense of fairness, getting at that equality that was mentioned earlier. I feel this is the third pillar of humanism, because compassion without egalitarianism can be hollow. Such empty compassion might be reminiscent of ancient Hindu societies, which undid the interest in compassion by stratifying society into castes, right? That allowed many to be considered less than human. Similarly, pre-Civil War Christian leaders urged slave owners to be kind to their slaves, but such compassion was worthless in the confines of slavery. And when conservative Christian or Muslims say the husband should be the head of the household but use his power kindly, they fool themselves to think that that is a kind of compassion. The principle of egalitarianism is the conviction that humans are basically equal despite differences in aptitude, and that each person should be treated as having inherent worth. There's certainly room for differing outcomes based on intellect, ability, and hard work, but acceptance of inequality between ethnic, cultural, or other groups as a grounds for discrimination is just insupportable from humanist reasoning. Which leads us to the conclusion we really do exist on this world as one people. So, is science compatible with traditional religion? Yes, no? What do you think? No? Yes? Some uncertainty. Well, as Unitarian Universalist Association President Peter Morales wrote, "Science is based on a radically democratic way of knowing in the sense that scientific truth is comprised of the things we can all experience, not on private experiences accessible only to gifted individuals." He points out accurately that science is a process for obtaining information where any person has a chance to change everybody else's mind if they could prove their point. There's no faith required to accept what we've learned from science as being the best answers currently available. Or as New York's Neil deGrasse Tyson says, Science is true whether you believe in it or not. The reliance on science as a process isn't really radical at all, if you think about it. What would be radical is to rely on any other method for knowledge. Unfortunately, I think Peter Morales goes a little further in that same article than he could have, and suggests that some things are outside of the realm of science. He writes, "Questions about meaning are not scientific questions," and goes on to relegate such questions to the realm of religion, as if untouched by science. But this tendency to create a safe place for traditional, non-modern religion, unlike ethical culture, which is much more modern and enlightened, is, I think, a mistake. It suggests that you can put aside the scientific questions when addressing questions of meaning that we actually do use when we address questions of meaning. We do consider observation, analysis, trial and error, and conclusion. We do think about consequences when we think about questions of meaning. So those aren't divorced from science. For some, I find that trial and error is so important, it is the path that some take in order to get to humanism in the first place. Comedian George Carlin said, "I've begun worshiping the sun for a number of reasons. First of all, unlike some other gods I can mention, I can see the sun. It's there for me every day, and the things it bring me are quite apparent all the time, like heat, light, food, and a lovely day. There's no mystery, no one asks me for money, and I don't have to dress up. Interestingly enough, I found that the prayers that I formerly offered to the sun and the prayers I formerly offered to God are all considered and answered in about the same 50-50 rate." All this considered, the break for some with traditional theism is a challenging one. We should give people experiencing this internal struggle a chance to explore and decide for themselves what's best. There are even millions and millions of Americans, in fact, who retain labels from traditionally oriented religions, such as Catholic or Jewish or Buddhist, but don't believe in an intervening God, as first clearly revealed in a 2009 Pew survey that kind of really went into this in depth, but for some reason they didn't repeat it in their future surveys. But what we learned was fascinating. You might wonder, where in what religious group do you think you could find the most humanists? Jewish? Others? Catholic? Unitarian? There's a lot of possibilities out there. But raw numbers, it is Catholic, actually. Because there's so many Catholics in the United States. 1.5% of Catholics don't believe in a God straight out. And another 20 to 25% believe God is some sort of impersonal force. Kind of the same kind of concept that Bernie Sanders talked about when he was asked about whether he believed in God or not. It's this force that kind of brings us together and unites us as humankind. Well, that's fine. Jewish folks have an even higher number there. So by percentage, 75% of Jews are either don't believe in God or believe God is an impersonal force from this survey. It's fascinating. So what people call themselves is one thing. What people believe is another thing. And one shouldn't just assume because they call themselves one thing that they believe that same thing. And then taking that a step further, what they do, ethical culture, it's about deed or before greed, right? So there we have it. It's these three pieces are sometimes in line, but not always. And I don't think it's about being honest or dishonest. It's just how we see each other and how we see ourselves. So, let me think. Should humanists be quiet about our humanism? Should humanists be quiet about the non-theist part of our humanism? What do you think? Should we get out there and be clear about not believing in God if we don't believe in God? Yeah. We have to, yes. Depends on the circumstances. I think that's true to some degree. I mean, we know folks who are in difficult places. We've helped a fellow who was in South Carolina getting discriminated against. His kids were being bullied in his school. it wasn't always the best time for him to bring it up necessarily. And I can understand why people might choose to be quieter about it. But not believing in a God may not be the most dominant issue in our lives. Understandably, humanism is a lot more positive than that. But it has to be recognized that in the culture we're in, it is meaningful to others. So if people are to be respected, they deserve to know who we truly are. Closeted non-believers once showed bravery, putting aside comforting religious stories about the existence and understanding of an all-powerful being instead of embracing a more scientific understanding of the world. If they can tap into their reservoirs of bravery again and fight the silence about their non-belief, they can stop concealing themselves from others, but more importantly, they laid the groundwork for removing the prejudice against all of us. So, many humanists may experience anti-theistic periods in their life where they feel countering the harm of religion is their best overall emphasis. What do we think about that? Is that something that's okay? Useless. Should we or should we not critique religion?
David Silverman claims that it helps people.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think it speaks to a lot of what is the best strategy? How do we have proper outreach? Is there a room for this? Is there not? And it's a question I've struggled with for some time. I think the essential mindset of critique of religion isn't what characterizes the positive thrust of humanist aspirations. It's tiresome to always talk about what we don't believe. But if we don't ever see anything to criticize in traditional religion, we may not be paying close enough attention. I think the religious right has wielded a dangerous weapon for years against both religious and the secular left by convincing mainstream people of faith, and even many secular folks, that critique of religion was inherently wrong. Religious extremists in our midst got a free pass to hate whoever they wish, discriminate as they like, seek laws that trample the rights of others, all free from criticism. For if it's a taboo to criticize religion and politics, and impolite to do it in circles where we might debate just about any other subject, then such anti-humanist ideas go unchecked. So we have to find a balance, I think, that allows us to critique bad ideas, but allows us to, at the same time, respect the people who hold them. So, will people sometimes take offense at our good without a God statement? You know, that's the American Humanist Association motto is good without a God. You think? They do, yeah. In fact, there's a book downstairs that says, Why Being Good Without a God is Not Enough, on the title, on the cover, that I saw. I think that foundationally, fundamentalists believe that goodness, all goodness, derives from their God. So the presence of anybody being good without their God is a reminder something is wrong with their belief on the source of goodness. They fumble for other possibilities, like the improbable ideal that all non-theists are bad, or the absurd conclusion that all non-theists, they don't even exist, and that we've just deluded ourselves into thinking that we're non-theists. You'd be surprised how often I hear this from reporters on the religious right side of things. They think, well, you don't really not believe. Well, yeah, I don't. I think the fundamentalist break with humanism, though, extends beyond the conundrum of our godless goodness. In desperately trying to hold on to their faith in the presence of the real world they occupy, they've had to draw lines in the sand before human evolution, elective abortion, same-sex marriage, and a whole slew of issues for which they are in direct opposition to humanists. We face a threat today. Religious right leaders continue to get their supporters in federal and state governments to advance extreme conservative sectarian agendas. I mean, they're working behind the scenes to do all sorts of things, and least of all, perhaps most important of all, though, is the appointment of far-right judges. And we know that that's going to be an issue, especially with the Supreme Court in the coming years. As government publicly embraces religious beliefs, it inhibits academic freedom, compromises our civil liberties, and tears down the wall of separation between religion and government. So I think a new embrace of humanistic reasons needed to hold back this assault on our protections and prevent us from going down paths toward more theocratic ideas. Humanism provides that philosophical foundation. Though we're not dogmatic, we don't have unchangeable rules, there's a general consensus about our approach to issues. We frame the debate highlighting the importance of human progress, human dignity, global responsibility, civil liberties, secular society, the environment, and a commitment to science over blind faith and pseudoscience. Humanist positions aren't dogmatic. They're by no means apolitical, though. They exhibit a real tendency toward liberalism. But do you think you could be a humanist and a conservative at the same time? Yes, maybe, maybe not. No. A conservative might believe they're humanists. We do find that from time to time. Those who are a little deluded in that regard. Perhaps maybe even a current presidential candidate. But I think it's not automatically inconsistent with humanism to reach the rational conclusion that local government is preferable to federal government, or that the private sector can do things better than the public sector sometimes, or that we shouldn't burden our grandchildren with debt. If folks arrive at traditionally conservative positions through reason, compassion, of course they can still be humanists. Regardless of individual differences, humanists of all stripes must recognize we need to work together to make things better, because no deity is going to do it for us. While humanists don't agree amongst ourselves on everything, we might even change our minds from time to time. We do have the insight to see that this is our strength, not our weakness. We know we need to work together, because this form of religious fundamentalism has emerged and gained ground. It is both anti-secular and political, and it's a danger to the democracy and values we humanists hold dear. So, in conclusion, I know most of you care deeply about environment, choice, and a myriad of other causes. But you made the time to be here. Humanism is what can unite us. Let's emphasize that positive humanism like never before and create the positive humanistic change we want to see. Thank you.